While local newspaper readers know the name Jeff Zeringue, one previous occupation he held was reporter for KTIB in the early 90s. Let's hear his memories of working just up Jackson Street from the Daily Comet. Jeff Zeringue, how are you today?
Doing fine, William. Thank you.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Are you from our area originally?
Very close by, native of Luling, Louisiana, which is right on the river. So have some Cajun origins, like a lot of folks around here. And it's really been nice to be able to stay close to home and work in a good profession.
What college did you go to?
Well, living in a small town, Luling, I really wanted to get away. So I went to Northwestern State University in Natchitoches, Louisiana, which, at 17 years old, that's like Justin Wilson used to say, that's way up north. And it was a very good experience, and enjoyed my time up there. Graduated in '89. During the time of going to college, I also worked for a radio station called KTIB-AM up there. It was neat. I was a programmer, and I learned a little bit about news, but mostly just about turning records and doing commercials and things like that. But it was fun.
Now, was journalism your college major?
Yes, it was. It was broadcast journalism. We did some writing. I had been published in the school newspaper and the local newspaper, and I had done some TV at the college, which was kind of fun. But once I got involved in radio, it was like a fever. You got hooked on it, and you really got into it, and that's where I first pursued my journalism career.
Now, did you have any other jobs before you joined KTIB?
Who in radio hasn't? Gosh, from KTIB, I went to a station in Illinois called WITT. It's a very small station. I was up there primarily for sales. How I got into sales, I'm not quite sure. And from there, I went to WSOY-FM in Decatur, Illinois, which is about 40 miles away. And still in sales, trying to break into either, at the time, DJing or more particularly, I wanted to do news. And when I was still in Illinois and I wanted to come back to Louisiana, homesick, my sister called me and she said, "Look, I saw an ad in the Picayune saying that radio station in Thibodeau's looking for a news director. Sounds like something you want to do?" I said, yeah, it does. So I called down and I talked to Marie Bergeron, who's the station manager then, and she said, "How did a Zeringue get way up north in Illinois?" And I told her, "I don't know, but I just want to come home." And I came down for an interview, and we hit it off, and I came to work for KTIB.
All right. What was your first year here?
My first year here was in fall of 1990. They were right at the beginning of municipal elections and school board elections, so I got to know a lot of politicians right off the bat.
So I take it the years you worked with Marie must have been pretty validating.
I think so. She really helped mold me into learning the real journalism. The really cool thing about coming to KTIB was I'd done radio news before at KZBL. I was news director there during college and right after college. But the really cool thing about KTIB was they allowed you to write more, to take more time to do stories, to put more into stories than the 4-second soundbite and the 15-second story. That's it. She really encouraged us to do more, and it was fun, and it really helped develop my writing skills, which really helped me propel to newspaper.
Now, how long did you stay here at KTIB?
I was at KTIB almost 3 years. I left in 1993 to go work for the Daily Comet as a reporter. Worked there for, I guess, almost 2 years, and spent some time at the Homer Courier. Started out as a business reporter there, and then moved to the copy desk so I could get a little more experience with the whole picture of working in newspaper. And then I had the opportunity to move to Opelousas and become city editor at the Daily World there. And from there, it led back home to Thibodeau and became editor of the Comet.
Well, going back to KTIB for a bit, I'd like for you to also talk about another gentleman who made his presence known here at the time as owner and pretty good manager as well, Raymond Sadie.
Mr. Ray. I remember my first meeting with Ray Sadie. I sat in his office and he interviewed me, and he just sort of had this laid-back way of saying, look, I don't need anybody who's going to read the news. I need somebody who's going to write the news. I need somebody to report. I need somebody to go out there and get the story from both sides. I need somebody who's going to go out there and represent us well and get the stories that we need on the air. And I said, well, I can do that. And he kept on with that, And I was getting kind of nervous because he has a presence about him. But the time I finished talking with him and went to a typing test to see how fast I could type, I was still nervous. I don't know how I did on the typing test, quite honestly, but I guess I did well enough for him to bring me aboard. He had a way of pulling the best out of me that you may not always agree with. Sometimes he was rough, but I think overall you had a sense that he really cared about KTIB. He really cared about the product that we put on the air, the quality of what we put on the air. And reading between the lines, he cared about you. He cared about the employee. So it was a good experience. It was a frightening experience at first, but it was a good experience. Wow.
Also another gentleman who I believe worked here in that same window, although he was mostly oriented around sports, Darren Fonts.
Darren Fonts and I hit it off right from the bat. I have tremendous respect for Darren Fonts and what he did here at KTIB. And I know that as he's moved on, too, that he's got to be doing just as well, if not better. He was always organized. He was always very knowledgeable about sports and what's going on at Nichols. Wasn't afraid to do the tough stories about Nichols. But I have a lot of admiration for him. He's a very, very swell guy.
Now, I want to ask about another gentleman, and there's no telling what might come out of your mouth when I mention this name, but a guy who's always been a pretty good character in our area, Chuck Botwell.
Character, yeah, that's pretty accurate, character. I remember when Chuck came aboard, and I kind of wondered, why was he here? Because he just seemed so zany than the rest of us. I mean, yeah, on radio you have to have a certain amount of ego, I guess. And you have to have a certain amount of resiliency. But I don't know. Chuck always seemed to be more zany than others. And I guess what impressed me is that in that zaniness, if you will, he was a pretty bright guy. And when he wanted to be, he was really top-notch. And the good thing about Chuck is he always, whether he intended it or not, he always made you look for the humor in everything. Politics, as fun as it could be, especially in the Foosh Parish, has always been an interest of mine. And I always looked at it with a pretty serious eye. Chuck was able to at least give me a breath of fresh air to maybe look at it a little differently, look at the humor in it, the human side of it, and that was refreshing. But Chuck's a nut, and I think he always will be. But I think more than anything, he put his heart into what he was doing, and he was fun to work with.
I want to ask about another gentleman who had a lot of personality as well and was here from basically the beginning of the station as well, Leroy Martin.
Mr. Leroy. When I first met him, he was already assessor, of course, and I'd go and visit with him in his office, and he'd tell me about the old times at KTIB and how he used to come and spin the records and go work at the assessor's office and come back and do his friend's show. And it was neat listening to the old stories that he had, and to know that he was once a part of the institution that I was not on at that time. It was just fun. There was one guy came on as on the board, and he and I became pretty close friends. Wade Cortez. Wade was one. He came to work at the KTIB during college, and he did some announcing. He did some reading. He did, of course, commercials. Everybody did commercials. They just worked the board. He was just a good, solid person to come and visit with and play around with, actually. We used to, I don't know if I should tell this, but he's going to hear, but we used to come in late at night after all the news. I'd try and unwind before I go home. We used to play fax paper ball. We would ball up the old faxes that would be thrown away and bat it across the counter in the control room in between commercials. So that was fun. Jackie was a neat woman to work with. Jackie, I heard her voice first. Coming down, I turned on the radio station. I heard her voice, and she had that deep female voice that was just awesome. And she read so well, so perfect pronunciation. But off the air, she was a bit zany too. But she not as zany as Chuck, of course. But she was just fun to work with. She was a solid person. She kept me really attuned to the whole community and thinking about how I wrote stories and what I said in stories. And I just remember one time she called me at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd written a story about a car chase that the cops had. The sheriff's office had chased this young kid through part of the country club and finally stopped him at a dead end. And I wrote that the suspect was a young black male, because that's only what I saw. They wouldn't release his name or anything like that. And she called me and criticized me for that, saying that I shouldn't have done it, that was insensitive, that I need to be more aware of what I'm writing, because it may reflect poorly on the black community, or in this particular instance, certainly that kid. And he was a juvenile, though we never released his name. We only described him. And I think, for me, it allowed me to think more about what I was writing and how sensitive I should be to the community while still getting the news out and reporting all the facts. It was a good learning experience.
There's one story I want to ask you about, because when you told me the years you worked here, there's one story that comes out to my mind, since meteorology was my college major, and that was trying to cover Hurricane Andrew. I'm sure there was quite a lengthy process in covering that storm.
That was an incredible storm. Jackie and Darren and I, we stayed here for, seemed like days. I was compiling information, talking to people, and recording sound bites and just feeding it all to them, to where I think we were all awake for about a 35-hour stretch at one time. So you get kind of loopy, I guess, toward the end of that. And when Jackie and Darren were just worn out and couldn't go anymore, I said, okay, I'll go in the air for a little while while y'all get some rest. I had 3 calls, and they were all asking whether I was okay because I sounded so bad on the air. But God, that was quite an experience. Wind gusts were blowing up against the building. You can hear them in all the tapes that we had done. You could watch the wind gauge in the control room just spike up as over 100 miles an hour at times. Sometimes sustained winds of well over 80. It was quite an experience because you really didn't know what was going to happen. You reported all that you could. You talked to as many people as you could. Mayor Goldemetto, we talked to time to time. They were saying that some transformers had blown and some tops of utility poles had ignited on fire. People's sheds and homes were just being damaged by all the wind that we had. The interesting part that we dealt with in telling everybody's story was the fact that we were in a position in the northeastern quadrant of the storm for longer than anyone else. The storm hit the coast. We were in the northeast quadrant, and it pivoted to make an eastwardly turn, so that this area had sustained winds, strong sustained winds, longer than a lot of parts of South Louisiana. We were fortunate that any tornadoes were spawned and came out in the Platte. But we had some hard, strong winds. And right after the storm, I got in a plane with Ben Harang. He was to fly down to Grand Isle to check his family's camp. And I got a chance to survey the damage from it. And I just recalled the sugarcane being matted down as though a giant had just rolled over it. The treetops are broken like little bitty pieces of broccoli would break off when you would prepare the food. It was amazing the damage you could see from that. The South Lafourche Airport was completely underwater. There was nothing. You could see the yellow line that planes would line themselves up with, and that was all. It was completely underwater.
Incredible time, and I know since then you being with the newspaper, ironically for our listeners that don't know, the KTIB studios originally was on top of the Daily Comet building, and so we kind of have had a connection with them for quite a long time. So I take it now that you're back into newspaper work since your radio tenure that it's probably pretty rewarding as well.
It has been rewarding. Every step of the way. It's funny because there were some frustrating times too, because the hours get very long and you work real hard and you wonder, am I making a difference? Am I doing things right? And I think when you look back upon your career, and I look back very fondly at my days in radio, especially at KTIB, and because one thing I didn't mention, I even did play-by-play from time to time as a fill-in. And I think looking back on everything, the news was fun, the reporting was fun, but probably my fondest memories would be doing play-by-play with Floyd Benoit at the Thibodeau game. This is a time when it was the season after the death of Eric Andelsek. We had an interview with his widow, and that was very touching. But it was a spirited game that night. I remember it was fun to call. But overall, when you look back on your life and see where you've been led, from maybe a change of career to a different place to work, it's all rewarding. And my KTIB days are going to long be very warm memories for me.
Well, before we head out, is there anything you'd like to tell all our listeners?
Oh, what can you say? Folks have been listening to KTIB for 50 years. They've been enjoying really some good production over the years. And just keep listening. Keep things local. Keep your eyes on local events, and keep your hearts here in Thibodeau.
Jeff Zeringue, another part of KTIB's History